record on this. All right, welcome to our Kairos church planning discussion from an interview with Carlos Isaziga, or Isaziga. He says you could say either way. And Carlos is a church planner in San Diego with Luminous City. And we're looking forward to talking with him in our series on addressing bias, racism, ministry, and Black Lives Matters movement and so forth. And so today we are really glad to have Carlos. So welcome to the session, Carlos. We're glad to have you here.
Hey, Ron, what's up? I am super excited to be with you guys and just to kind of be doing some stuff together with the Kairos family. And so it's good. It's good.
Thank you. Hey, would you like to start out sharing a little bit about yourself as we had it? Because I didn't get to put that in the bio.
Yeah. No worries. I can totally do that. So I was born in Colombia, South America, and we moved to United States. I was fairly young. I was about 5-6 years old, and was raised in New York for a little while, a couple of years in New York, and then in Miami. Then we moved to Miami, and I spent most of my teenage years, I would say, in Miami. Two very multi-cultural, multi-ethnic cities, obviously, and so graduated from high school there, and married my high school sweetheart. Gina and I both met in high school, and dated for 3 years before we got married, and married in '94. Had our first child in '98, and so we got 3 kids. Isabella, Isaac, and Emma, 21, 18, and 15, and been in ministry now for quite a while. I think now really started full-time ministry in 2000, but I really started in ministry, right, in the volunteer, at least the volunteer side of things, probably in '95, and everything from volunteering at church with youth to becoming a deacon at a church, you name it, and so until we stepped full time in the ministry. And so that's kind of a little bit about me. That's the short story for me. And so
When did you plant Luminous City?
So we planted Luminous City Church March 24th of 2019. And so we would have celebrated our 1-year anniversary March 2020, but of course we had some interruptions.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Hey, where in Colombia were you born?
So I was born in Cali, Colombia.
Yep. I was down there a year ago.
Yeah.
I was in Cali and Ibagué and Bogota and Paria. Wow. Cali was a big city, huge.
It is a huge city.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's we have a passion for big cities, and that's actually part of our vision for our church and future churches. And so God has always kind of kept us around big cities. We were actually, to be honest with you, we were actually not in a big city for a good portion of our time. When I was first married with Gina, we were in Panama City, Florida, for 17 years. And that's the longest we've ever been out of a big city in both of our lives, because Gina and I both have just been in and around big cities most of our lives. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I drank the water in Cali. That was a bad mistake.
Yeah.
I had to take my medicine. But the food was amazing. Wow.
No, the food is so good. The food is so good.
Hey, thank you for sharing that. So we've got a couple questions for you, and then we'll
Yeah.
open it up to our quite a few visitors on here if anyone has a question. But in light of what's going on with protests and
Mm.
the issues of police brutality and so forth, um, we wanted to have our church planners and other ministers know what can we do uh, concerning this bias, racism, ministry, Black Lives Matter. What can Because most of our churches aren't as diverse as some. So what can we do as ministers?
You know, several things really come to mind. Um, I think, wow, yeah, a lot of things come to mind, but I think that there's those personal steps that we can take if we really want to do something. I think first and foremost is really, I mean, your question is what can we do, right? As ministers, as pastors, what can we do? I think maybe the first question is, do we want to do anything about it? I think it's a time for us to have a lot of self-reflection. Um, you know, I love what Jesus says, in Matthew 22, right? You gotta, what's the greatest commandment, and he says, love God, love people, love your neighbor as you love yourself, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think we're okay with love God and love people, love your neighbor, love people as you love yourself. That we don't spend too much time on trying to think through that. Like, okay, loving myself. Am I willing to make the personal reflection? Am I willing to do the hard work of introspection into my heart, my mind? What are my beliefs? What are my worldviews about people? Just because my great granddad believed and lived this way, has that shaped me, and has that put things in front of me that have created barriers to really live out the way of Jesus, right? Because I think it's just a lot of introspect. This is a moment for a lot of introspect. If you're a minister, if you're a pastor, this is a time when we really need to have some hard conversations with ourselves, and a lot of time in prayer about where we stand on some things. And so I guess beginning there, right? The best leaders lead themselves first before they lead a crowd. And so pray, read scripture, ask God, talk to God about where you stand on a lot of the issues going on right now. And so that'd be my first thing. And secondly, I would say, what do we do? Again, lead yourself, but then let's lead our church as well. Once you can come away from having that dialogue with yourself about where you stand in regards to the Black community, then I think the next step of action is, how are we going to lead our churches well through this? How are we going to lead in our communities well through this? I think that's the next step, and teaching by example. And we've heard this a lot. It's not anything new or groundbreaking, but I may have added an extra L or two, but number one, I think it's lean in. So lean into, if you've had the conversation with yourself and you realize, okay, I've got to change some things about me to really move the gospel forward, because I do believe what we're dealing with right now is not a political issue. It's not, as many people, you can politicize it as much as you want, but it's a life thing. It's a humanity thing. Racism and prejudice is not a political thing. We can politicize anything we want. I can politicize that chair right there, if I really wanted to. But it's about human life. And so I believe the greatest subject pertaining to human life is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so if it's a life thing, it has to be a gospel thing. And so if we as pastors and ministers want to move the needle forward, um, with the lens of the gospel, then we need to be able to say, okay, am I going to lean into this? Leaning in means, am I going to be proactive? Am I going to am I going to want to move forward into what the next step is? And the next step is to learn. You've seen it a lot on social media, on the news. Learn, pick up a book. I do Audible. I love Audible because my time is is really valuable, and I get through books a whole lot quicker. I can ingest the content a whole lot quicker via Audible than reading it. So I just picked up a book by Ibram X. Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I want to read that. I want to read that because I want to educate myself. I am Hispanic. I'm Latino, but I'm also white. And so I have very little knowledge of what it feels like to be a Black man in the United States. And I would be fooling myself and fooling my church if I claimed to have any kind of semblance of what that was just because I watched a movie, or even read a book or a documentary, right? But that still doesn't negate the fact that we need to lean in and learn. There are great documentaries on Netflix and other places, and great books that we can read. And so I've learned a lot lately. There are things that I didn't know before. I'm just being honest with you. I was ignorant to. I'm not going to sit here and condemn our education system. I'm not going to sit here and condemn our government or anything of that nature. But there are just a lot of things that I was not taught, or maybe I missed, because I wasn't paying attention in class. But watched a great documentary called about the 13th Amendment. For example, redlining. Those are facts. Those are facts. And so it's just learning, educating ourselves, right? So that's the second L, learn. The next one is probably even tougher for me, and that's to listen. I'm always very quick to wanna say a word of encouragement, or hey, I'm with you, and a lot of times, let me just give you a great example. I was at a barbershop, which California has opened up barbershops, in case you're wondering out there. But I was at a barbershop, and it's predominantly Black barbershop. And my barber, he and I were talking, and I was just asking him, hey, how are things going for you, man? How are you doing? And one of the things he said was, Carlos, it's just getting very taxing for me to constantly respond to the emails and phone calls of my white friends and brothers and sisters in Christ, just constantly asking me, are you okay? Are you okay? How can I be there for you? And he said, I get it. It's well-meaning. But he said two things. Number one, every time they ask, it's like I have to replay the scenario, in my head, of how I'm doing. And secondly, some of them, I've asked them, I'm doing okay, but where were you? How are you doing? Because where were you, 2-3 years ago or whatever, when I was in a group, in a party or something, and in our group, in our conversation, somebody says something racist towards me, where were you then? You're here now asking me how I'm doing. And so there were just a lot of mixed emotions with that. And so I think the best thing we can do is just listen, instead of right away try to say something, just listening. And some of us are better listeners than others. That's just facts. And then the last L is love, right? I think everything has to be done in love. And if we don't sincerely, truly have a love for our brothers and sisters, for our friends, our family, for our neighbors, we are all neighbors in this planet called Earth. We have all been made in the image of God. You know, Matthew 25, you know, Jesus is talking about if you did the least things for these, you know, you did it for me, you know, like we all have the stamp of God, the image of God, and no matter what color we are. And so unless we're truly, really loving, right? Like with a motive of love, not trying to leverage, you know, a political standpoint or anything of that nature, then I think we can really make a way forward on this. And so, yeah, that's what I would say that we can begin by doing. There's probably more and other points of views, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was great. Lean, learn, listen, and love. You know, ask ourselves, do we want to do anything?
Yeah.
And then lead by leaning, learning, listening, and love.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. So the second question, and you may have already touched on it a little bit, but a lot of, you know, we have church planners all over the country and ministers all over the country, and you've got pockets of people in congregations that think this is all blown out of proportion. You know, I think Javon mentioned 2 weeks ago, you know, they look for that one Black person that says what they want to hear, you know, and it discounts everything else. But what's your suggestion to those of us working with people in congregations who don't really believe this is an issue? You know, and this is where ministers hesitate to share because we feel like they get an argument or something like that. But what's the advice on how to lead people?
Yeah. I think it's I'm gonna begin with the last L from the previous, and that's, you know, to lead in with into a conversation like that, you know, with love and compassion towards people who may not necessarily have the same viewpoint as we do. Anytime we get combative or get to a place where compassion is absent, it's just going to eliminate an opportunity for conversation, right? And so I think being emotionally, having an emotional IQ, a sense of where you are emotionally, is important as a pastor and minister. Having the emotional IQ to know how to deal with people who are getting the best of your emotions when they say things that are contrary to maybe what you're believing or what you're passionate about right now, may cause a block, right, in us being able to communicate with them. And so it's going to take a lot of work from us internally, right, to be able to dialogue. But I think what we need to do is just have those conversations with people that are calm, that are, you know, defused, and begin with the gospel in mind. Begin if this is a Christian person, right? For people in our churches, begin with the gospel in mind. Begin talking about which is the passage. I think it's in Luke. You know, when Jesus is in the synagogue and he preaches from the scroll, the prophecy from Isaiah. You know, I came to bring justice and, you know, give sight to the blind. And he mentions justice there twice, I think. And then lastly, he says, his name will be the hope of the world. And so I think beginning the conversation with a Christian with the gospel in mind, saying this is like, you know, this is not, we need to move away from this thing being Republican or Democrat or anything of that matter, right? And beginning with the gospel in mind and having the gospel conversation. There were people in Jesus's day that were being oppressed. There are people today that are still being oppressed. And all over the world, right? It isn't just the Black community, right? Let's just, you know, I want to say two things. Number one, I think we're all very aware that around the world, not just the Black community is being oppressed. We get that. We're also very aware that all lives do matter. We're not saying all lives don't matter, because I think the inflammatory thing that's occurring right now is Black Lives Matter, right? The statement, you know, and what we're saying is, hey, listen, yeah, we get it. All lives matter, you know, like give me a break. You know, like we get that. But what we're saying right now is that Black Lives Matter, and this statement is the one that captivated me the most, is that until Black Lives Matter, all lives really won't matter, you know? And so it's a human thing. It's a gospel centric thing. That's where the conversation needs to begin. And for us to try to be wise enough and emotionally stable enough to not allow people to take us down a road in the conversation where it gets polarized or politicized in some way. But this is the greatest example. Our worship pastor and I just started a series this past Sunday called "Done Being Silent," a conversation about Jesus, racism, and the way forward. Our worship pastor, Dante, is Black, and we sat together and we unpacked the story of the Good Samaritan. We actually tackled that subject, the Black Lives Matter statement, and why some people get so ticked off about that, you know. And here's the thing, you know, we shared a few really good examples on that. You know, the one Dante shared was amazing. He said, you know, if there's a house on fire in a neighborhood, the fire department does not come and start hosing off all 12 houses on that neighborhood. They come and they start putting out the fire on, you know, the house that's on fire. And then an example I had is, you know, from a comedian, actually, Mike Shea. He said, you know, if your wife asks you, "Hey, honey, do you love me?" You know, you don't say, "Honey, I love everybody." You know, you don't say that. Or take, for example, you know, 9/11, incredibly tragic, traumatic, catastrophic time of our country. Imagine if at this upcoming 9/11, right, that will happen in a couple months, we celebrate it every year. We say, never forget, right? Never forget, never forget. Let's just say in 2020 on 9/11, I wore a t-shirt that says, "All buildings matter." I mean, you know, it's just, and so when people, and again, those two examples are not mine, that's from comedian Michael Shea, but, you know, when people get upset about that term, I don't know. It causes me to wonder, like, what are they thinking about? What is their worldview about other people? What is their view about the gospel? You know, what, and so anyway, yeah, I don't know if that was helpful, but those are my thoughts on that.
No, it was very helpful. Dante's a great worship leader. I really
He is.
have enjoyed tuning in on some of the online. Yeah, I think it was a good answer, because I think it's a struggle for a lot of us. You know, we want to just wash our hands with people. We want to just kick them out, and trying to bring people with patience forward. And I like what you said, begin with the gospel in mind, try to bring them along. I'm going to ask a third question. It just hit me, and I should have asked you ahead of time. It's basically, can you describe, you know, the struggles and the blessings of leading a diverse church? Because the research, you know, all the church growth research I'm 57, so back when I was in school, I mean, all the research said homogenous church. I mean, if you want to grow, and then the International Church of Christ Crossroads movement proved that really didn't work. And so what we see is that diverse churches are necessary. And what are some of the, I guess you could say, struggles and blessings for trying to lead one?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think, you know, diverse churches are just, you know, they're the heart of God. They're in the heart of God and the mind of God, and the plan of Jesus. I mean, you think about the day of Pentecost, right? Just that day alone, Jews from all over the place speaking different languages, coming together, and they hear every language spoken, right, as it was, from their own territory. You know, that's just one simple example, right? Jesus' vision for the church, go, you'll be my witnesses in, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth, right? Ends of the earth. It's a beautiful sight. It's a beautiful thing to look at and to be a part of, because the church is a mosaic. The church should be a mosaic of people from all walks of life and all colors and backgrounds. For me, so our church, Luminous City, is very diverse. It's got Filipino people, Black people. It's got Hispanics. Probably one of the greatest compliments, we've gotten from our church has been someone said to me after one of our Sunday experiences. They said, "Man, your church is a perfect representation of the city." And so, that's praise and glory be to God for that. And that's exactly what we want. As a matter of fact, Gina and I joked about it not too long after that comment was made. We said, I think we probably need more white people in our church. And so,
Yeah.
we do have a very diverse church. And so going back to your question, what's the blessings and difficulties? So for me, right, just for me, I don't see any difficulty in it, because I've always just been around the melting pot of people. To me, it's my life. To me, to me, there's nothing outside the norm. To me, it's how I was brought up. To me, it's the streets that I lived in. To me, it's how just the nature of my fiber. And so, this is not helpful probably, but it's just, to me, there is no difficulty in it. To me, that it's all blessing. To me, it's entirely all blessing. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any necessarily practical, anything that we can just application, maybe I would say, if you're finding some difficulty, right, in leading, if your church is, multi-ethnic, multicultural, and you're finding some difficulty, maybe it's a time for you to really take a step back and think through why you're having that difficulty. Where is that difficulty coming from? What is the difficulty? Maybe it's a time for you to sit down with some of your church members who are of the opposite race and opposite culture, and buy them all coffee, but wear a mask, and buy them all coffee and just sit down and ask them, hey, share with me some of the things that make it difficult for me to pastor you, share with me some of the things. How do you see me, and just ask questions, ask good, healthy questions. And then with the blessings, I think for the blessings, again, it's mind frame and heart, right? I think being able to just see the blessings of where God has put you, and if you need to find some blessings in leading a multicultural church, I think just start reading, the letters that Paul wrote to the churches, and begin to look for some blessings in there. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great book, Ethnic Blends, by Damas and Lee. It's a multicultural churches. They have very large ones, and it's a lot of what you just said there. It's a good read and right up what you're saying. So, and you've been great. You've given some great info.
Multicultural church, leading churches with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I think a lot of it is going to be really dependent upon where you are geographically. We cannot we can't shoot ourselves in the foot or be that harsh on ourselves. If I was leading a church in the suburbs in North County, San Diego, where, it's predominantly Hispanic, and all I have is a Hispanic church, predominantly Hispanic church. Don't beat yourself up because you only have Hispanic people at your church. If you're, it's just, sometimes we try so hard, we try so hard to be something, to do something, to be a church that, maybe really, really God hasn't called us to be in that specific geographical place. A lot of our worldview is made up of who we are and where we're from. And that goes for churches as well. And so I think geography plays a big role. If I was here in downtown and our church was just predominantly white, or predominantly Filipino, or predominantly one specific culture, I would be concerned,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. When you mentioned being born in Cali, Colombia, the thing that I noticed when I was down there was like that we visited the apostolic churches, but I mean, it was black and very, very light skinned individuals. And when our group came back and were sharing with the congregation, the people that mentioned that, that's an extremely diverse congregation. I mean, it was almost 50-50. We went, wherever we went. And I was impressed with, in Colombia, how it just didn't seem, it didn't seem that color mattered in the conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that was convicting, for an America has a much different attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
So we'll open this up for questions. I guess, Bruce, you got anything?
We may not have many questions right now, but if somebody's watching this, if this gets posted, and people have a question, obviously they're more than welcome to reach me via email at carlos@luminouscitysd.org. Feel free to send me an email, shoot me an email with a question if you're watching this at a later broadcast time. I'll be more than happy to try to answer as best I can.
I've got one for both of you. So Carlos, I just saw on social media, I think you attended a protest march maybe a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think, Ron, you have two. And I have not attended one here in Rhode Island. We've had, I think, two so far that have been, one was just incredibly peaceful. One kind of crossed the line at the end of it. But I was just curious, as two people who did attend some protest march and march with other people, what was your, I don't know, any learnings from there? Were the conversations good? What was encouraging? I think, we all see these through the lens of someone's pictures or through social media, and I always think we're missing something. I want to hear the eyewitness, viewpoint of all that.
Go ahead, Carlos.
Yeah. I've attended two of them. I've attended two of them and led one. And I think there was a predominantly peaceful spirit about each of those protests that I was a part of. The first one was the first one that we had here in downtown San Diego. That was it was really big. It was huge, and it was very moving to be a part of. It was very moving to see just really the pain in people's faces. that I really have no clue about. You know, I'm so far removed other than me hearing something on the news. And so again, it's, for me, it was part of that. I want to lean in and I want to learn. I want to be able to feel as much as I can. Right. And so, yeah, I went with my wife and my oldest daughter, and it was an incredible experience. At the beginning, there was one time when two people were kind of getting carried away. It was kind of getting, I don't want to say violent, but verbally it was beginning to escalate. And it almost seemed like they were trying to hijack the peaceful protests. But it was cool to watch the crowd. Now you're talking about, close to 1,000 people, right? But it was very cool to watch the crowd literally tell those people to shut up and sit down. The people that were trying to instigate, and so that was really amazing. It did get intense towards the end. We rounded back. We were all over the city and rounded back to the Justice Hall. And there at the Justice Hall, man, I had never seen so many police in my life, National Guard. It was just bananas. And there was protesting. It was peaceful protesting. But it wasn't until, it just takes one person, but I think somebody threw a water bottle, that set something off in the front. And then I saw 2 canisters of tear gas, and then shots of, the pellet, the little air. They're like little paintballs, but they're filled with like tear gas stuff. Shots of that, and that's when we boogied. But for the most part, and the second one was peaceful, and then the one we led as a church was peaceful as well. And so, yeah.
Carlos had said something, and I wanted to share this because it reminded me. He made the comment, "All lives won't matter till Black lives do." So I think he and Lori must have read the same quote.
Yeah.
But we went to one, and
that's good.
We went to one. It was lower key. It was in our area, and we took the boys, and they did like a 1-mile walk to City Hall. We're like, a mile. So we got in the car and drove and met the boys down there at City Hall. But we felt, but there were other cars doing it, so we didn't feel bad. But and the thing is, that for us, we did it to support the Black Lives Matter movement. We did it because we wanted our boys to see, and we've always I've taken the boys when they had Occupy groups downtown Portland. We've taken them on the Women's March, and we want them to see that, because one of the things the boys go to a school that's highly diverse, and they'll talk about how they're on the playing field and the other team, all white kids, are saying stuff to their players, and they get really worked up about it. And I think they've not been able to hang around their friends because I can tell because they're needing that listening capacity,
Mm-hmm.
So going there, and then they saw, we knew some of the parents from the football team, they were there. And so, they hooked up, and it kind of helped in our relationships with them, to just let them know we want to listen. And that's what we tell the boys. I think every leader ought to go to protest and just listen, observe, and look and see what goes along. And, your family, you'd say, you're here to listen. You got all of the, F the police and defund it. We got friends who are cops, and we tell them we stand by you, we support you. And, but I think, like Carlos said, I think going, it's that, as he says, leaning in, listening, and we just go to support, and we don't say anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if anything, and I like the way you said that, self-reflection, the Occupy movement, did it do any good? I don't know, but it really affected me. It upped our commitment to homelessness, and, what are we going to take away from this, and what can we do as a family, and
Mhm.
what can we do with our friends, or like the barber, what can we do when we're in a group of people and something's said,
Yeah. 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 That's the key, is that, um, I had a conversation with a driver. We have a service here in the city called Circuit. They're basically like these jacked up golf carts with, you could seat like 12 people, and they give free rides all over downtown. You book them like Uber. But anyway, one of the Circuit drivers the other day, black man, we were talking about it, and he was an older man, and one of the things he said was, Carlos, we've seen this in the past, the protests, and we've seen, white allies. We've seen, this is not something new. The only thing new about this is really how it's gone worldwide, which is a great thing. But he said, we've seen this before, and it's not unless we make some real reform that we'll see some change. Reform to, obviously legislature, government, police training, police reform, things of that nature, that will really see some kind of real move forward, progress. And I agree. I believe in that. I think if we're in a right moment right now. 2020 has been an amazing year. It's been crazy. But I really do believe, I just got off the phone before this call with Pastor Dante, as we're just debriefing, talking about next upcoming Sunday's message. And we were talking about 2020. And you think about it, I think, 2020 vision, I think God has lifted a lot of the things to the surface for us to see clear. He began with COVID-19, and I credit this phrase to a friend of mine, Pastor Kenneth Hart in New York with the Gathering Harlem. He led a peaceful protest a couple weeks back, and in his message before the protest began to the crowd, he said, we began the year with COVID-19, world pandemic, but we've been dealing with another type of pandemic, another type of COVID, not COVID-19, but COVID-16-19.
Yeah.
For a long time. And I think God is really trying to do something. He's trying to do something seismic in 2020. He's shifting a lot of big things in 2020. It's not coincidental. This is not coincidental, what's going on in any way, shape, or form. He's trying to clarify our vision for the world and for people. And the first thing he did was pause the world, and they brought something to light. Again, I don't want to over spiritualize things, but the reality is that God is at work in everything, and he's trying to clarify. He's trying to clarify vision. 2020.
Yeah.
Really good.
Very, very powerful. Thank you.
Yeah.
You got anything else, Bruce?
I'm thinking of our mutual friend Neil Reynolds, Carlos, who I heard him talk about this a couple weeks ago. He said when Jesus brought the gospel to the world, baked into it was racial reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, Paul talks about as this mystery that no one really saw it coming. There were, it was definitely a felt need, but it was so, I don't know. I would think it was so outlandish that anyone would even try to solve it, that it wasn't even at the top of people's things that they needed the Messiah to fix.
Yeah.
They needed the Messiah to give them power against their oppressor, but the way they would go about it obviously wasn't the way Jesus, went about it. And I'm just struck by I keep coming back to this John 4 woman at the well conversation,
Mm-hmm.
when she just says, she really describes how bad it is. Why are you even talking to me? We shouldn't even be talking. Why? And it's like the racial discord is so sharp. We're not even supposed to be speaking to one another, is what she's saying is the norm of her racial existence with Jewish people. And I just don't know. We're not going to be able to solve this thing from below. It's got to be with Christ's help from above.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's part of God's work.
Yeah.
I really love that the way you've brought that about today, made that clear to us. But also, as you just stated, I think we all want, I guess as we get older, we want incremental change we can all handle, so that way we don't ruffle too many feathers and it doesn't create too many inconveniences in our life, and that's not, it's sometimes God has to shake the world, and
Jesus didn't roll that way.
No, he did not. It was a pretty hard hitting 3 years of ministry. Right. And then he blew it all up, coming out of the tomb. So, but just, and the world hasn't been the same. And I think you're right. We have to see this as these are not accidents. These are divine movements.
Yeah.
I don't think you can over spiritualize it. I really don't.
No.
That's usually not our problem. I'll say that. And I just appreciate you coming on here today to relay your experience, but also, we have whites and Hispanics and blacks and other races that are just still so far from figuring this thing out. And I am still recoiling, to me, from the message of that Jesus, I think, is reopening our eyes to at this time.
Yeah.
And that we have a long way to go, and this is Jesus' dying wish that his people will be one, and we're not close.
And I want to just say one thing before we go. I think if you haven't watched the interview this came out maybe 2 weeks ago, between Christine Kane and Dr. Anita Phillips on Facebook, I would highly recommend you go watch this. This is just type it up, search it. Christine Kane and Anita Phillips, Dr. Anita Phillips. And one of the things that really just jumped out at me from that interview, Bruce, you mentioned the word, racial reconciliation, and it's a great term. It's a great message. It's it's something that we want. But something that she brings to light is that, before we can even talk about racial reconciliation, there has to be healing first. Racial reconciliation infers that there was a relationship already.
Right.
And I'll go to your example of the woman at the well. Even with Samaritans, as sharp and as terrible as that relationship was, there was a pre-existing relationship already. Samaritans were Jews at one point or another. There was a reconciliation door made available. There has never been a door of reconciliation made between the Black community and the white or the rest of the world, for that matter, right? And we could say the same thing about Native Americans, and so there has to be healing. We can't just jump into, racial reconciliation. We got to achieve that by all means. So that's great, but there has to be healing first. That's what Jesus did. His approach was always, let me heal. The passage that we're unpacking this Sunday, let me look at my notes here, is John 9. John 9, you remember, young man, blind man, and he heals him. And, but then the rest of the whole chapter is consumed by, just like Jesus heals, but yet everybody else, the people in power, the religious elite, the parents, they were consumed not with the healing, but with everything else that had nothing to do with the healing or the well-being for this man, who had been born blind from birth, you know. And then I love the last part of that story, you know, basically in essence, look, Jesus says, I came to bring judgment on the world, to show you who say you can see that you really can't see, and to give sight to the blind, you know. And so healing has to take place. You know, I think healing has to take place beginning with us, you know, and saying, okay, I need to heal from whatever it is that I've been taught or heard or believed about the Black community. I need to be healed from that. And it has to be a divine healing. And then I need to be someone who brings in healing. Before we even think about racial reconciliation, you know? So anyway, this is good conversation. This is great stuff.
Good word.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Carlos. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom on this. And we'll post this, and we'll see. I know a lot of our people are going to really be blessed by what you have to say.
Well, great. I hope it's a blessing to them. And Ron, I appreciate you having me on. And again, I'm also in the journey of learning and listening and leaning in and really loving our neighbor.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Hey, let's go ahead and close out with a prayer, okay? I'm going to stop the recording.